Hey Wargamers, so the day is finally here. Games Workshop has finally released their April FAQ. It's only the 29th of April, so it's good. So today I want to talk about some of those features. I've looked at the FAQs briefly. I got kind of a sense for what's going on, but let's kind of go through it together and take a look. If you're not familiar with where to find FAQs, I see the question all the time, where do I get the FAQs? It's very simple, warhammer-community.com/FAQs. That brings you to this website here. And then, of course, it will start off on the Age of Sigmar tab. So if you're interested in 40k facts, you got to put them over here under the Warhammer 40k tab, and look, bam, there they all are. Sometimes it can be confusing because of differences in like the rule book versus chapter approved versus your codex, but everything that you need is here. So let's take a look at this main document that they released, the update itself. These are the release notes, and it covers all the big changes that they've made in the FAQ. And as you might expect, the game is starting to mature a little bit here. We're not really in a place where there's huge ground-shaking changes that need to be made, but there are still impactful adjustments that are being made throughout this document. So it's important to read carefully and go over everything. Now, I'm not going to read everything word for word for you here. If you're interested, of course, go ahead, read them yourselves. But I want to kind of go through and give you the gist about all these different things. So they start off talking about core rule changes and clarifications, starting with wobbly models. And this is something that has really been a pain in my side, I think. But if you're not familiar, wobbly models is a term that we use to refer to a situation where you normally would be able to place a model somewhere, but it would be precarious to do so. And so in order to preserve the paint job or the assembly of the model, we say, okay, everybody agrees this model is here. I'm going to move it over here on the side of the table though, or I'm going to just nudge it a little bit so that it doesn't just tip over, that sort of thing. But everybody agrees this is where it is, and in fact that it could be placed there. And this is really something you see with like top heavy models or flyers. Anything that's going to tip over easily, wobbly model is an important concept. But where we get into trouble is people tend to try to use wobbly model to, kind of pseudo rule away a lot of different issues, most notably when you're trying to place a model on a piece of terrain where it really couldn't fit, i.e. if there's only, a square millimeter left on that piece of terrain, you can't put your bloodthirster or whatever else up on top of that terrain element because it literally couldn't fit. You can't say, oh, wobbly model, let's just agree that it's here. No, they are clarifying here once and for all, that is not what they mean by wobbly model. I really appreciate that they're doing this because it does kind of alleviate a lot of those uncomfortable moments when you're playing with someone and they try to evoke wobbly model in non-wobbly model scenarios. So this is a fantastic change. It means that indeed you do have to be able to physically place the model there in order to do so. And that's a great clarification. They also clarify that the edge of the battlefield is the end of the universe. So you can't have a part of a model or any part of a base off of the edge of the board. So if you are deploying your, flyer on the edge of the table, or if you're playing a tank or a Riptide, whatever you want it to be, and part of that model or part of that base slips off the side of the table based on the amount of space that you left for that, that's a no-go. You can't do that. You can't have part of your flyer, part of your tank, part of your Riptide hanging off the edge of the table. Everything has to be within the confines of the table edge. So they do adjust that to say that you have to have everything on the tabletop. That means that you have to plan your deployment carefully. I think this is, kind of been the common knowledge going forward that, or common knowledge or, the de facto rule for a lot of people, but not everyone. So it's important that that's clarified. Just make sure that you're deploying consistently and leaving room for your models where they need that room. Additionally, they are clarifying disembarking from destroyed transports. So essentially saying that you can't declare a charge after you get out of a destroyed transport. This would otherwise circumvent a lot of rules that pertain to transport. So it's good that they clarified this as well. That means that it's not actually advantageous for assault armies to have their vehicles destroyed. So that's a good clarification there. And then, I think probably the biggest component of this clarification, at least from my perspective, is they are stepping back their previous FAQ on the fly rule. Now, fly is still a very powerful keyword. It has always been a very powerful keyword, but in the last FAQ, they made it so that if you are assaulting using the fly keyword, you can no longer ignore intervening models. And they clarify that when they said this, they were trying to address kind of a weird scenario where a lot of fortifications are indeed models and not terrain elements. And so they were trying to address those things and not things like infantry squads. And so they are rephrasing this in a way that allows your fly infantry to, or your fly models to ignore infantry when they make their assault move. So when they make their charge move, which is really important. It loosens up a lot of restrictions on assault armies that relied on fly. I'm looking at you, Blood Angels. So by doing this, now your Smash Captain can actually get into combat with the thing that he really wants to smash instead of having to go through endless waves of chaff beforehand. So this is really important there. And also for things like Tau, if we're using the vectored maneuvering thrusters, this allows them to actually ignore intervening models now again when they use that thrust move. So a huge change primarily affects assault-based armies, but also very valuable for a select few other units that use non-movement fly movements to better position or get out of trouble, things like that. So really a huge change here for the better, and I'm glad that they did this because it really was penalizing a lot of armies that were relying on that fly maneuver to get into combat. And it's good that they retained some of the restrictions, right? So you don't ignore terrain, you can't ignore buildings or anything like that. So that avoids all the issues with, what distance do I measure, which is great, but it still gives you the flexibility of being able to ignore infantry. So a fantastic change there. I'm really happy that they did this. And then, of course, there's a bunch of different scenarios where they need to address it specifically. So in general movement, but also things like flip belts, wraith form, vanguard strike, intercessors, and interceptors. Both of those have movement abilities that need to be adjusted now because they can ignore intervening models again, which is fantastic. They also create a new keyword, aircraft. Aircraft is exactly what you think it is. It's a model with fly that has, a minimum movement or occupies the flyer battlefield role. So mostly the things that you are thinking of as aircraft are indeed aircraft. And this means that they are treated slightly differently than other types of flying units for the purposes of movement. So they can essentially be ignored if they are within 1 inch of an infantry unit or something else. So that doesn't lock that unit in combat. They say that originally there was an issue where, or at least currently there's an issue where flyers could tie up infantry squads in combat, and that didn't really make sense because they're supposed to be zooming around the battlefield. And so now aircraft can no longer do that because, they're up in the sky. So that's a really interesting move. It'll be cool to see how that affects a lot of meta lists. I mean, aircraft aren't a huge component of the meta right now anyway, but there are certain lists, like I'm thinking primarily like Eldari lists that do utilize a fair number of aircraft. So being able to adjust how useful those are is important. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. Resetting up models, they're essentially just saying that you can't do shenanigans with replenishing wounds or replenishing models. They're giving you a whole lot of basically a step-by-step way of dealing with that. And it makes sense. I think, again, it's a good change, but it's a clarification that will help resolve a lot of kind of awkward conversations at the tabletop where one opponent thinks that you can, basically get a whole unit back for free if you set it back up. And of course there are certain things that you can actually do that with, like certain stratagems allow that to actually happen. But as far as just standard game mechanics, that's not how it works. So they clarify that, and that's very useful. Okay, so overall, I think this is a fantastic set of updates. So when we look at the actual rulebook FAQ, we see a lot of what we just talked about in magenta here, but there are a few things down at the bottom that I don't think they really touched on that are somewhat interesting. So I want to talk about those before we move on and get to the Tau FAQ. Whoop, we went way too far. Okay, so at the bottom here it says if my warlord or if my opponent's warlord was slain during the battle, but has an ability, stratagem, etc., that has allowed it to be set back up again during the battle, do I score victory points for Slay the Warlord? And the answer is you only get victory points for Slay the Warlord if it's destroyed at the end of the battle. So not by the end of the battle, but at the end of the battle. So if you kill Celestine and then she pops back up and she's alive at the end of the battle, you do not get Slay the Warlord, which is a good clarification. That was always been kind of a nebulous topic, I think. And then something up here, so if the Search and Destroy or Vanguard strike deployment map is determined, must the deployment zones be located in the exact corner specified in the deployment map? So, and the answer is yes. So instead of being able to choose, which angle you're playing with here, you have to go with the one that's prescribed in the map. So you can't invert it. You can't take the mirror image and play it that way. So that's important because, in certain styles, your game table isn't going to be symmetrical. If it's symmetrical, then it doesn't matter. But if it's asymmetrical, being restricted to that deployment is important. I think this makes sense, right? Because it's not like you can wiggle around any other deployment. So why would you be able to wiggle around this one? It makes sense. But an important thing. It's something that I'd actually really thought too much about in the past. Okay, so let's look at the Tau FAQ. I know this is probably what you're here for, but yeah. So we'll go through all these with a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb. So page 89, Master of War, change the Cao Yun ability to read Cao Yun. On a turn in which you declare Cao Yun at the start of your movement phase, you can select any friendly Sept units that are within 6 inches of the Sept commander. Until the end of the turn, the selected units cannot move for any reason, but you can reroll failed hit rolls for attacks made by these units. The key difference here is that this wording allows you to select individual units, whereas the previous wording was it just happens. And I was always of the mindset of that just being an inherent cost of using the Master of War ability, is that if you position poorly, then you're stuck. You don't, too bad, so sad. But this adjustment here makes that a non-issue. So now if you have a unit that's, right next to Shadow Sun and she calls Cao Yun twice, that unit doesn't have to stand still. It can move and just not benefit from Cao Yun, which is fantastic. I know there are plenty of people that said that this is how it's always worked. I disagree. And so I'm glad that they clarified this. Now this is clear how it works. So that's fantastic. Page 106, Riptide Battlesuit, Nova Reactor. Add the following sentence to the end of the boost bullet point. The boost bullet point of this ability? Oh, that makes sense. Okay. You cannot use this ability to move within 1 inch of any model. Cool. Makes sense, right? Like you can't tie up a unit using your boost ability. Yeah, that makes sense. Coordinated fire arcs. Change this ability to read when a unit with this tenet uses the for the greater good ability, or when they fire Overwatch whilst they are within 6 inches of another friendly Tau-stepped unit, a 5 or a 6 is required for a successful hit roll, irrespective of firing models, ballistic skill, or any modifiers. That's just kind of making the wording there a little bit more concrete. I think everyone was aware of this being the way it would work, but being able to avoid any conflicts with modifiers, with any type of interaction is important. So I think that's why they did that, and it makes sense. I don't think there's any actual difference in how that rule is working, which is important because that's a fantastic rule. FAQs. So in Index Xenos 2 and Imperial Armor Index Xenos, the Stimulant Injector was a piece of war gear that I could purchase for certain Tau Empire units. In Codex Tau, blah, blah, blah. We know the story here. And they're saying, no, you can't purchase Stimulant Injectors anymore. You have to use the stratagem instead. And this is something that they've had in the past. I'm not sure why it's magenta. I think it might be that it's including the Imperial Armor Index. But yeah, it's been a long-standing thing that you can't use the Stimulant Injector war gear, so I'm guessing that it has to be because of the Imperial Armor loophole potentially. But yeah, no, you can't use Stimulant Injectors anymore. Old news. With regards to the Cadre Fireblade's volley fire ability, what exactly is meant by may fire an extra shot? And these next two are where it gets a little bit more interesting. They do clarify that you get to fire an additional shot within half range, meaning 3 for a fire warrior with a pulse rifle. Again, that's been a long settled debate, but they do kind of have a little bit of an oopsie here, a little bit of a gaffe. So it says, note that for a model with a pulse rifle, this means that it would make 2 hit rolls unless the target is within half range, in which case it would make 3 hit rolls. Right? So I think that wording is that wording is wrong, right? Because, of course, the volley fire ability only works at half range, and so does rapid fire only work at half range. So it should say that it would make 1 hit roll unless the target is within half range, in which case it would make 3. So it's 1 or 3, not 2 or 3. So they messed that up, because there's no way using the rules as they are otherwise to make this true, unless they change the volley fire ability to apply at any distance, which they haven't done here. So pretty clearly just a typo there. Question: how many shots does a model armed with the multiple pulse weapons fire when affected by a Cadre Fireblade's volley fire ability? And so the example, of course, is for gun drones. They're asking, do you get 2 extra shots or 1 extra shot? And in the past, they had FAQ'd it to just be 1 extra shot. Now you're returned to 2 extra shots, which is good. So a gun drone at half range, so 9 inches, would get 6 shots, which is a ton of shots. It's not enough to make gun drones, I don't know. I mean, within 9 inches is so short that this is unlikely to be super useful. The exception, of course, being for Overwatch or something like that. Like, this is fantastic for Overwatch. A gun drone shooting 6 shots that we're already going to hit on a 5 or a 6, and if they're Tau-Sep, they're still hitting on a 5 or a 6. I mean, come on, like that's pretty good if you're just concerned about Overwatch. So, I mean, and gun drones are just more efficient, more points efficient in some scenarios than fire warriors. So, I mean, this certainly helps gun drones. Not that was a huge issue in the first place. I mean, I think the bigger issue is, being able to, take as many shield drones as you need. But yeah, if you're taking gun drones, this is a great help. So, a little bit of a windy road there, but yeah, you get your 6 shots from a gun drone, within 9 inches when it's affected by volley fire again, which is good. when a Tau Empire vehicle that has the attached drones ability but not transport keyword is destroyed, how do the attached drones disembark? And basically, this is just saying, hey, even though it's not a transport, treat it like it's a transport, and that makes sense, right? So that means if you have guns on your Hammerhead, guns on your Piranhas, guns on, or gun drones on, I don't know, whatever else, if you have your interceptor drones on your Sunshark bomber, they can still disembark if the vehicle is destroyed, which is important, really good. Do not just take that vehicle off the table. You can keep your drones, and they can live another day to die another day in glorious saver protocol. So make sure that you are rolling for your disembark for those drones. They do not just disappear with the vehicle. Additionally, if several Piranhas form a single unit, and those Piranhas are destroyed, do the disembarking drones form one unit or multiple units? And can they disembark from their actual Piranha, or can they disembark from any Piranhas in that unit? And they say no. Each set of drones is treated as a separate unit. So if you have a unit of 3 Piranhas and they're all destroyed, you have now 3 2-man units of drones, which is good and bad, right? It gives you a little bit more flexibility, but overall, I think this is a fantastic clarification because it keeps coming up. I'm so glad that they included this because it's a big question that I see people ask about Piranhas time and time again, and it's been kind of unclear to me exactly what the answer is. So I'm glad that they addressed that. So now instead of having one big unit of drones pop out of a unit of Piranhas, if that were ever the case, they clarify to say that no, it's several small units of drones, which is good because it not only splits up your opponent's firing, it allows those drones to spread out, take up more space on the battlefield, and also you're not as concerned about saver protocols, which is good. So overall, I think a pretty good FAQ for Tau. A lot of helpful clarifications. The only concerning thing here is that gaff with FAQ, which or with volley fire, which some people are gonna really fixate on. But I mean, come on, it's clearly a typo. So overall, good FAQ for Tau. Pretty beneficial overall. I think it's a good adjustment and good clarifications. One thing that we talked about with jetpacks now being able to, or rather the vectored maneuvering thrusters being able to work normally again is fantastic. You're pretty good. It's not as good as it used to be still, right? Like you still can't ignore vertical distance, but you can ignore other models, which is important because really the reason why you want to bring maneuvering thrusters, originally is really to hide, but otherwise to, GTFO, and if there are models in the way, good luck. So now you don't have to worry about those models anymore, which is fantastic. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, how you feel about the general FAQ as well as the Tau specific one. Love to hear your thoughts, and as always, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This channel is made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there and continuing the discussion on our associated Discord server. Special thanks to Shifty, Jim Bob, Scott Heater, Nick Steele, Jared Eggeler, Tao Oswell, Zach Brooks, Stephen Cohen, Jake Johnson, Eric Jackson, Benjamin Julian Peck, Andy M. Young, Giovanni DiMaggio, and Chris Kessler.